and travel around the world. And what's so sad about this, as far as I'm concerned, is that these young men didn't need that much encouragement to get out there and get at it. They just needed some encouragement, or at least maybe they needed at least one person who wasn't actively telling them every second that every single shred of ambition they might manifest is nothing but the pathology that drives tyranny and the raping force that destroys the planet.
Yes,
so,
yep.
Enough of that, man. Really, like, enough of that.
Agreed. I think we need to send a fundamentally different message, which is that their lives, look, the world will not be what it could be without them. I think that's the I think that's the message. By the way, I think that's the message of the Bible. I think that's the message of American history. It's that the world, there are things that can be done in the world, things that should be done in the world that only you can do. And that if you don't do them, they won't happen. And the world and the people around it, your family, your spouse, your children, they will be impoverished if you don't shoulder the responsibility that you can shoulder. That's a high vision. That's a high calling. By the way, that's true of our country. Our country will be less if you don't take on the obligations of citizenship. This country can be greater. It can be more with you as part of it. And it won't be what it could be without you. We need you. And I think that is the message men need to hear.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, is that to the degree that each person is unique, and each person is unique to a great degree, then each person has something to bring into the world that only they could bring into it. And that's literally the case. And I do believe that that's part and parcel of the idea that human beings are made in the image of God. God is presented in the biblical corpus as the fundamental creative force of reality itself. And that's echoed inside of us. And so if we don't bring forth what is within us, then there's a lack in the structure of reality, and that lack produces undue pain and misery and suffering. And so it is the case that each person needs to shoulder the responsibility for improving the garden, you might say, as you pointed out earlier, or working towards the perfectibility of existence itself. And that's a heavy load for each person to bear too, because it turns out that it isn't true that nothing you do matters. What's true is that everything you do matters a lot more than you think, and you should get the hell at it now, because or else, in some sense. You know, the other thing we know as a consequence of having blundered our way through the entire 20th century is that when people do abdicate their responsibility en masse, which is what you saw in, Nazi Germany, what you saw in totalitarian Soviet Union and in Mao's China, that things turn into hell very, very rapidly.
Yeah, that's right. And this goes back to a point that you've made, Jordan, that I think is exactly right, and I think is just deeply true, is that we can either be moving the world to be more like what it should be, we can make it a little bit more like heaven, or we can make it more like hell. And we're going to do one or the other. And so if we abdicate if men abdicate their responsibilities, if they create a vacuum, then you've got to expect that malign forces will come into that vacuum and will do terrible things, which is what we saw in the 20th century. On the other hand, if men will shoulder their responsibility and be faithful husbands, faithful fathers, strong workers, and by the way, these don't have to be dramatic things. I mean, I think that our world is so ordered that even small things, even small acts of faithfulness, small acts of sacrifice, small acts of constructive work have huge effects over time in our own lives and in the lives of people around. So it's not as if you don't have to go cure cancer in order to make a difference.
They're only small if you're blind. All those. There's nothing that's done right is small. So really, and I really believe that's the case, in the therapeutic process, when you're working with someone as a behavioral therapist, you almost always help them initiate small transformations. But first of all, that small transformation often means a reversal of direction. And a reversal of direction isn't small. It couldn't be more different to go 180 degrees in the opposite direction. That's a big change. And just because you start small doesn't mean you end up going slow, especially if the consequence is that with each victory you accrue in the new direction, the next step is more likely to occur and in a larger manner. You get that power law starting to kick in, so that you don't improve linearly, you improve exponentially once you start moving forward. And so I think the smallness of right action is only a consequence of a kind of of an inappropriate perspective that assumes that the local and daily is minimally important when there's no evidence for that at all. I mean, you can think about this way to some degree. The most intense relationships that you're going to have in your life are local. The relationship you have with your wife and with your child. And you might think, well, that's only my child. It's not every child in the world. It's only my wife. It's not every woman in the world. But that local focus has an intensity that is truly indicative of its significance, I would say. And so that's another reason why conservatives can help people put the local back in a superordinate position. It's like, it isn't only that your family matters. It's that your family matters more than anything else. And that's appropriate. It's not that you're abdicating your social responsibility that way, as you're manifesting your true social responsibility through your intense engagement with the local. And that might mean you're a dishwasher, so you get the hell out of bed and you show up to work 15 minutes early so the restaurant can run properly. And that's not trivial. And if you think it's trivial, it's because there's something wrong with your attitude, not because it's trivial in and of itself.
And I think that presenting men with a vision, again, young men in particular, with a vision that says that, yeah, even those things, getting to work early, doing something kind for somebody, being faithful to your partner, those things can literally change the fabric of the universe. You're working on the fabric of the world in doing these things, and you are making the world more of what it could be. That's a high calling. It's a noble calling. And I just think that kind of vision, the leftist rhetoric, I think suppresses and destroys that sort of vision, and it therefore suppresses and destroys a healthy ambition. And instead what it substitutes is a desire just to fulfill momentary pleasure, to indulge momentary whims. And I think that's what you see unfortunately, a lot of young men doing. And there's one other aspect to this, Jordan, that gets to more of a policy issue that I think conservatives in a political sense need to address. In this country, in the United States, a lot of men who don't have an advanced college degree or a four-year college degree, their economic prospects in terms of the kind of job that they can get, in terms of their ability to support a family, are severely diminished and have been getting worse over decades. Conservatives, if they're going to call men to responsibility, and we should, if they're going to say that we need you, we've also at the same time got to say we need to have a society and an economy that provides you with productive work on which you can sustain a family, that there is a legitimate shot for you to go out there, get a job, get married, have a family, and sustain them if you will work hard and apply yourself. And conservatives need to be about crafting that kind of an economy. And I worry, Jordan, that part of what's happened in the last 30 and 40 years is we've increasingly had an economy that's in the United States has become hyper-globalized, that works for a small set of people. It's the people who have advanced degrees in certain sectors, and does not work for the vast majority of the rest of the population, and does not work for a lot of working class men. And that's tied up with this. And I think conservatives have got to open their eyes and say, we've got to go out and say, we need a society and an economy that is going to be able to support work, support a family. And you can't be pro-family unless you're pro an economy where you can actually support a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a form of regulatory capture by the intellectual elite.
That's right. That's right. And also, the globalist agenda, which is really an elite project. It's a project of people who don't believe in nations, who don't believe in the local community, who don't believe in local traditions. What they believe is they think that their values, which they share with other educated elite around the country, around the world rather, that those ought to be what structures the world. Those ought to be what structures the economy. They pursued this agenda of hyperglobalism that has in the United States resulted in shipping working class jobs overseas, shutting down jobs that were good-paying jobs in small towns like the one that I grew up in. And it has really decimated not just the economic fortunes of many, many men, and women too, but it has also badly damaged the social fabric of this country. And so part of what I think conservatives in America need to do is we need to say, listen, we're going to be for an agenda that is unapologetically pro-American worker, unapologetically pro-work, and unapologetically for the kind of work that you can support a family on. And we've got to make some changes in order to do that. And
what kind of changes do you think might need to be made at the political level in order, let's say that the goal was to foster a working man's commitment to his family and to his job and to the advancement of his career, let's say, through that job. What sort of transformations of policy do you think might be helpful at the level of detail to facilitate that kind of vision?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we've got to be able to give that man some prospect that if he actually will if he'll get a job, if he'll commit himself to work, if he'll show up, as you said, and he'll invest himself, that he'll be able to support himself and to advance. In order to do that, Jordan, we've got to get jobs back into the United States of America where we actually produce things and make things, where a guy who does not have a college degree, and listen, only 35% of Americans have a 4-year college degree or more.
Right,
and a
decreasing percentage of men are going to have that as well.
That is correct. And so, you're looking at almost 70%, let's say, of men. I think it's more than 70% of the workforce does not have a 4-year college degree. We have to have an economy where a man can get a good paying job. So how do we do that? We have to bring production back to the United States. Jordan, we've got to produce things here. We've got to grow things here. Let me give you an example. The average salary of a manufacturing type job in the United States, of a production type job, a year or two ago was $22.50 was the average hourly wage, $22.50. In retail, the average hourly wage is like $13. In services, it's slightly higher, but not much. The point is that manufacturing jobs, production jobs, historically pay better. You could support a family on those. They have but they drive research and development, by the way. They drive the services industry. And what's happened in this country is I think and conservatives, unfortunately, Republicans have been part of this problem, big part of it. We've had a stupid economic policy that for 30 and 40 years or longer has said, we're willing to see jobs go overseas to places like China. We are willing to trade away our manufacturing and our production of all kinds, whether we're talking about precision tooling or whether we're talking about advanced farming. We're willing to see those things go away in order to get more cheap stuff from overseas and in order to build up a services and Wall Street driven economy. I think that has been a fundamental mistake, and conservatives need to change it. And you asked about how do we do it? One of the things we've got to do is we have got to set a tariff policy and a trade policy that actually works for America. And I think that works for American workers and is geared, Jordan, towards bringing back and fostering good-paying production jobs in this country. So that is a different way of thinking than most Republicans in the United States have thought for the last 30 or 40 years, where they've been very pro-globalization. And I think that it's hard to be pro-globalization and pro-family, pro-worker at the same time.